politics follows culture. Politicians are not really leaders. I know they like to, you know, go out there like a peacock and say that, they're leaders, but by and large, they're followers. They're not leaders. Politicians don't go out on a limb because they have to get reelected. Um, they have to take a position most times that's supported by the public. So they're not gonna create new legislation. They're not gonna provide leadership if the public isn't demanding change. Think of it as a popularity contest. Okay, they're not going to do anything to harm their own popularity. If the issue is popular, they'll jump on board, but they're not going to be leading the effort. And this is what makes Trump unique, because as a billionaire and as a senior statesman, uh, he doesn't need to be popular. I mean, he's already, so he's not running for re-election. He's not worried about popularity necessarily. I mean, I think he pays attention to it, but what makes Trump unique is that he's not beholden uh, to special interests, lobbyists, or uh, the whims of the public per se. But the politician, your average politician, is, your congressman and your senator, is very, very sensitive to public opinion. So when we see things like foreign drivers involved in these accidents, uh, trucking industry has been aware of this for a very long time. The politicians are just now waking up to it. It's not the first fatality that involved a foreign driver who couldn't speak English. We had a bad accident here in Texas within the last few months. It didn't receive the national attention that Florida did. When the Florida accident happened, that hit close to home because it was near Mar-a-Lago for one, and the U-turn was such an egregious violation that it just got a lot of attention. But it wasn't the first time. The accident in Texas, the foreigner fell asleep, and then he just plowed in to stop traffic. Um, and then there was another one in Colorado a couple years ago where the guy couldn't speak English. He came down the mountain on I-70. Traffic was stopped in Denver, and he plowed into traffic, lost his brakes. So it's not the first time. I mean, there's been, many, many times. I don't know the totality. The DOT wasn't tracking it. That's one of the problems. They didn't want to discriminate against foreigners, so they weren't tracking the data. But if they go back and they pull the news articles, they'll probably find, many, many, many examples of foreigners that can't speak English involved in traffic accidents. Now, this has been an issue within the trucking industry, but the general public wasn't fully aware. And so this is where, politics follows culture. Now that the public understands that this is a problem, now the politicians pick it up. They should have picked it up 15 years ago, but it wasn't a major issue back then. So when we think, like we're in the trucking industry, we're like, this is so aggravating. Why doesn't the politicians do something? Well, that's because they're not really leading. They're not leading for change. Trump is, but by and large, your elected representative is not. They are following the trends in culture. They're not leading. They don't go out on a limb and introduce change for no reason. If they're pushing legislation, it's because there's popular support for that legislation. So there's always this delayed effect between a problem and a solution. So in this case, the problem is non-domiciled CDL and English language proficiency. It's been an issue for a long, long time. Um, Now culture is caught up. Now that the culture is understanding what the problem is. Now the politicians are getting involved. It's like, where you been? This has been going on for years. You're just now waking up to the fact that's how it works. So when we think about the problems that are ailing the trucking industry, it's the politicians who write the rules and regulations, and they're not going to, you know, provide changes unless the culture uh, demands it, because they have to get reelected. So unless there's popular demand, they're not going to push for change. If it's not a hot button issue, they're not going to address it. Obviously, this latest fatality in Florida became a hot button issue. They can't ignore it. Now they're going to address it. It's good that they're addressing it, but they are awful slow to the game. It took them a long time. They ignored the fatalities in Texas and Colorado. They just pushed that off as just happenstance. It just happened to happen. No, this is the exact same thing. Foreign driver, can't speak English, probably being taken advantage of by a small carrier. Um, One guy fell asleep, another guy lost his brakes, but it doesn't really matter. The end result's the same. The general public, many drivers were in their cars and they were killed by foreign drivers who couldn't speak English. So this is what happens, unfortunately, in our current state of affairs, is that politics follows culture. Politicians are not leaders, they're followers. This is why, like OOIDA, when they have a hot issue, they want the drivers to call their congressman, because the reason for calling your congressman or mailing your congressman and asking them about these issues affecting drivers is because these politicians are not leading, they're following. So if their constituents are coming to them with an issue, if that reaches a certain number of people, it gets their attention. But if nobody raises the issue, then they're not going to address it. Again, they're not leading, they're following. And this is what makes Trump different. Trump is leading. It's breathtaking and refreshing to have a president who's a leader. Even past presidents were kind of like followers. They followed public opinion. Bill Clinton was famous for this. Before Bill Clinton made any decision, he wanted to take a public poll, see what public opinion was. Based on public opinion, he would change policy. But Trump isn't waiting around for public opinion. He's providing true leadership. We haven't seen it, and even then, Reagan didn't achieve this much success as Trump has. Reagan was a strong leader, but he wasn't necessarily the business leader that Trump is. So we see with Trump, we see leadership on a global stage. Even our European allies are following Trump. It is good to have a leader in government like that. But your average politician is not a leader. They're not gonna go out there and make changes until the public demands changes. They're the Johnny come late. They're the ones that jump on the bandwagon. But they're not out there leading the parade. They will take credit, for the changes, but they're late to the party. So now they're waking up to the idea that, hey, maybe we shouldn't give work visas to foreign truck drivers. That's their biggest thing right now. They're suspending that, which is good. We'll take it, but they're awful late. They're very late to this game. But that's how politics work. They don't lead, they follow. And when you're banging your head against the wall, wanting leadership, you gotta understand that they're not leaders. They may claim to be leaders, but they're not. They're followers. So That's why OOIDA says you got to pick up the phone and call your congressman. Because they're not gonna go out on a limb on their own unless they know they got public support or public demand for change. All right, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the internet.